All applications have preferences, and of course, Photoshop is no exception to that rule. There are a lot of them. Now, if you've got Windows, go to the word Edit and go down to Preferences. If you're working on a Mac, go to the word Photoshop and go down to Preferences. Once you get here, they're the same. Well, we could spend a half hour talking about all these very easily, if not longer. I want to talk about preferences as we use them, but there are a few I think you should set up front for efficiency and, in my opinion, your own sanity. Click General. That's a Control K or a Command or Apple K on a Mac. Basically, start with General, just one or two I want to mention here, and we'll get into some of these others as we work. I would suggest that you turn off beep when done. Anybody have a microwave? What happens when your food, that wonderful microwaved TV dinner, is done? It goes beep. Well, everything you do in Photoshop is a function, and it will beep every time it's done. And I do believe that after a couple of days of listening to that, you're going to go crazy. So I would suggest turning that one off. I also suggest turning this one off right here, Export Clipboard. Why? When you're doing a clipboard function, basically you're saying, I'm going to go into Photoshop, I'm going to select something, I'm going to say Edit Copy. That moves it to clipboard memory, that's your RAM memory. Then I'm going to close Photoshop, I'm going to open another application, and I'm going to paste that information in there. Now, there are a million reasons why you shouldn't do that. Everything from color management to resolution. You should always save things as files and open them as files. But if you leave that on, that means all the things you're doing in Photoshop, and we do a lot of copy pasting within Photoshop. When you close Photoshop down, all that stuff is still clogging up your RAM memory. If you turn that off, Photoshop purges RAM and gets it ready for your other applications. And in the years I've been using Photoshop, I don't think I've ever used Export Clipboard. I turn it off, but by default it is on. So you probably want to turn that one off. You have a lot of other options going on in here. I would suggest after you get to know the program to turn off tooltips, because to me they just kind of get in the way. But until you know the program, it's kind of nice to be able to see that stuff. Let's go to Performance, and we'll skip everything else. Let's go to Performance. Photoshop needs things to work fast for you. It needs RAM memory. Now that's what's available up here. RAM memory is how much RAM you give Photoshop, and it's based on when the program is open. Now my system has about, I think, 12 gig on it. Right now I got a lot of things going on. It's telling me how much available RAM I have, the ideal range it would like, which I'm in that ideal range, and I can move this slider to change the percentage. Never ever crank that to 100%. Photoshop doesn't share well. A lot of other things on your computer, including your operating system, need RAM memory to function. If you actually slide that to 100%, I guarantee eventually you will start crashing because other things need memory. I would suggest 69, 75%, somewhere around there is actually a pretty good number. Save stuff for other things. The other area is what's called scratch disks. Scratch disks are areas that help divide the load. Think of it this way. Photoshop actually writes back to your hard drive. Every time you're working on a file, it needs about 5 times the size of the file. So if you're working on a, say, 100 meg file, you need 500 megs of free contiguous space on your hard drive to make that work. Well, think what else is going on here. You're working with other things, you've got other programs open, and you've got one scratch disk, in other words, your main drive. That's a lot of work for one drive to do. If, and this is a big if, but if you have other drives hooked up to your computer system, use them. In other words, come in here, they'll all be there. Now, I've turned off my boot drive. It doesn't use the boot drive. It only uses these, which will free my boot drive up for operating Photoshop, and all these are for writing and working. Some studies show that if you activate scratch disks and you're using fast drives, you want things like FireWires or USB 2s, basically you can increase the overall speed of processing in Photoshop by 20%. So if you've got additional drives hooked up to your computer, it can't hurt anything. Try it, activate it. You may see yourself going faster. I'll mention a couple other things over in this corner right here. History states are your undos. Now you can crank that number up to 1,000, but I wouldn't recommend it, mainly because it also requires memory to make that happen. And the more history states you have, the more memory is being used to hold those things. I would also suggest that if you need 1,000 undos, you're not paying attention to what you're doing in Photoshop, and what you really need is maybe some caffeine, coffee, chocolate, whatever you want, to pay attention. I find 20 is enough for me. You might want 40, you might want 10, it's up to you. But history states are the number of undos that we have. A lot of people ask what this is, cache levels. Cache levels are actually screen redraws, the number of times it will save, in a sense, the information of the image you're working on in these screen redraws. What's its purpose? It really helps Photoshop rewrite things fast. Things go faster. Now, you can go up to 8 cache levels, but that's more RAM memory. If you take it down to 1, you're disabling it, which makes things go, you have more RAM, but it slows things down. 4 is a good number. Now, you have these options up here. It says tall and thin. Notice it changed to 2 cache levels. And you have big and flat, and then it changed the tile size. I'll mention that in a second. Default goes back to 4 cache and 128 tile size. What it's saying is you can change those things based on what you're working on. You can choose bigger tile sizes, and that's the one we haven't talked about yet, for faster processing documents that are large. And you can choose smaller tile sizes for documents with small pixel dimensions and a lot of layers. On the other side, for cache levels, basically you choose more cache levels for really big documents that don't have a lot of layers. And you can choose fewer cache levels if you've got very small documents, but you have a whole bunch of layers. In other words, you may change this to get Photoshop working faster for you. The tile size is how it redraws. Now think of it this way. When this image over here redraws, it draws it in little bricks or tiles. That's the size of the tiles it redraws in. Every once in a while, when the program's running a little bit slow, you can kind of see it building it by these tiles. You can change those to larger sizes. And again, it's depending on what you're doing. These are the defaults. I see no need to change them unless I feel Photoshop is running less efficiently. Okay, the rest of what's going on in here, we will talk about later. As we get into the program and as we need them, we'll come back to talk about them. But remember your preferences, remember performance. Let's get the system running at least 20% faster. And for your own sanity, turn off things like beep when done.